Welcome, everyone, to this edition of ICology Live. I'm your host, Chuck Gose, ICology founder and senior strategic advisor of Social Chorus. Hope you all, at least from the U.S., I believe it was also a bank holiday in the U.K., coming back after a refreshing weekend, and at least in the U.S., able to honor those on Memorial Day. Today, we are joined by Greg Monaco from Monaco Branding. Greg, I was thinking back, my math might be off by a year or two, so I'm going to range this. I think we first met probably 4 years ago, I believe in New York City at a comms event. And then since then, you've transitioned into a new role, which we'll talk about as part of this. But want to welcome all of you to participate. I'm going to pull up our chat window here. Introduce yourselves so we can see who is watching us, who is joining, and please use the chat to continue the conversation. Friend Keith Riley out of the UK. Yes, Keith, very proud of the funky music coming in. I'm not sure if that was the intro part, the more chill part, Keith, or the jazzy part at the end, but thanks for enjoying that music. So, Greg, one of the things we're going to have here, we're talking about one-line or one-sentence stories. One-line stories. Why is that so important? What is the value of having that one-line story, that one-sentence story for an individual?
Well, introductions are probably one of the most awkward things we do. Hey, what do you do? And then it's sort of like this improv moment. And sometimes you hit it and sometimes you don't. So the one-line story idea is meant to distill and crystallize, to help you get a clearer understanding of really what you're out to create for other folks. And so the awkwardness and discomfort you have of talking about yourself starts to dissipate when you are just communicating the difference you want to make in the world. So it's a real handy tool.
So let's take a couple steps back and talk about what you're doing with Monaco Branding and the type of work you do with clients around helping them develop their personal brand.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. And by the way, I think we met in Nashville. That was the first time we met.
Was that the first time?
Yeah.
It's possible.
Yeah. It was at an internal communication conference, and my brand consultancy was transitioning to work internally with organizations. And so you mentioned that I had made a transformation from that to the work that I'm doing. I mean, it's essentially the same kind of work, brand development, but for people now. So that's kind of how the transition has happened for me, is the principles of brand development apply externally for corporations and how they attract their customers. It works internally for organizations and how they keep their employees aligned, but it also happens for yourself and how to keep you centered on what you want to do. So that's how it's kind of been a transformation for me.
Yeah, I don't know, Greg, that a lot of people think of themselves and their brand as having something similar traits to that of a corporate brand out there. So for those that are watching and joining us along, chime in the comments with what are the brands that you put on a pedestal and why? What are those corporate brands out there that you elevate the stature of, that you believe in their values and you think are a true, I don't like to use the word authentic a lot, Greg, but have that authentic brand out there. So put those in the comments. Let us know what you think about those. We'll pull some in. And then Greg, from your side, coming from a brand perspective, what are the brands that you see that just rise above the rest?
Yeah. I mean, you look at, and I'm just going to have to bring up brands that we all, know and love, so we can all kind of have a frame of reference. But I happen to be a huge, a huge Apple fan.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah, and I got these two. So they have managed to create such an impactful story about their product, which is not necessarily, I mean, arguably, this product here, the iPhone, is, you could argue that it's an inferior product compared to the other things that are out there right now, but it's part of the ecosystem of what Apple has created, which is, it's essentially a creator's platform. It's for people who believe themselves to be creatives, believe themselves to, and they enable you to become more of a creative individual. So that's the story that they represent. That's the story they tell themselves, and that's the story they tell the world.
So I think that's blasphemy, Greg, to say that the iPhone is an inferior product. I think we all secretly know it. Like we see that they come out with things that we know that Android has had for a while. But you're right, there is that brand. It also feels like a bit of an ecosystem part too, because once you get bought in, you really can't leave, which makes me, we sometimes wonder if people that are Android users, if you're an Android user, raise your hand in the broadcast, but they're almost like punishing themselves for some reason. Like the green textures, we call them. Like when you send them a text that's green, it's not the cool blue iMessage out there.
It's almost like, I mean, what Apple has done is it's created kind of a cult, and there is a bit of elitism that I think comes out of being part of this culture, where you kind of frown upon, and I would say there's plenty of Android users who frown upon Apple users as well. So there's like these two camps that have been created. I think the big note here, though, is all of us have pet brands, brands that we really connect with. And usually those brands that are so integrated with who we are based on kind of a value system. If you're a fan, just think about the car you drive. I happen to drive a Mazda because I don't have to worry about it. I go from point A to point B, and there is zero hassle to it. I'm not really all that enamored with how powerful the engine is. I just want no trouble getting to my destination. I happen to align with that kind of value system. So, all of us have our likes and dislikes when it comes to brands.
So I just got an alert from my producer, Greg, that our live broadcast might have been disconnected.
Oh, no.
It's a fancy Post-it note. I'm honestly not sure what I'm worried about hitting stop, because I don't think we can even get back into this. So let's just keep going with the conversation, if you're all right with that.
100%.
I'm going to do a Twitter check and see if it's maybe just one platform over another.
Yeah, no problem.
It shows we are still broadcasting live.
Okay.
I think we're live on some and just not on others. So we're going to keep going.
Okay.
Keep going with this.
Yeah.
So whether it's a personal brand or a corporate brand, Greg, what are those core pieces of a brand? Like what are the elements that someone should look to strive to build around building a strong, let's bring it back to more the personal side, building that personal brand?
Well, I'll just say that the goal of brand development is to create indelible connections with the people who matter. That's all a brand is meant to do, is build relationships. So that's what a corporate brand wants to do. That's what a personal brand wants to do. So it's the process of building that brand is identical. There really is no difference. It's getting to understand at the core of the organization or at the core of you what matters, what you're trying to create, what you're manifesting, who it matters with. That's your target audience. I like to use bullseye audience. And then how do you create the connection? That's the storytelling. That's like, so it's those three parts, and that's really what brands are.
And then, so let's bring this to the world of internal communications, which compared to, let's say, someone who's historically been in PR or media relations, internal communicators really have their eyes focused in to the organization.
Yeah.
So what is the difference, and should an internal communicator have a different internal brand versus potentially an external brand? Because I don't see a lot of, let me correct that. The internal communicators I see are the ones who have strong brands. And is there a reason for that versus the ones who might just be focused on their organization? So let's talk about the ones that are really focused on their organization first. How does someone build a brand inside an organization?
Yeah. So a lot of, and this is not just with internal communicators, it's just employees in general, they become consumed and buried within the organization. They actually kind of like forget themselves and are so hyper focused on the organization. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I mean, that is your duty, is to be obsessed with the organization, to do the best work that you can. But let's face it, your job is not forever. And there's a two-pronged reason for wanting to help identify your own personal brand and your own voice within the organization. Number one, there's something that I like to call your own zone of genius, but you bring something to the internal communications game that other folks may not bring. And people should know about it. People should know that they can count on you for bringing that into existence within the organization. You're the go-to person for that. So that's good. And then the second would be, well, to just create relevancy, marketability, and longevity for yourself, beyond necessarily your job right now. So how are you going to lay that runway for yourself into the future? And that's really the kind of the long game of branding yourself.
I want to go back to this zone of genius thing, because I like this. And here's where my mind went with it, in that for a lot of communicators, especially internal communicators, sometimes they are the only one doing their job inside their organization. Depending on the size of company you work for, you might be one of 200 people doing internal communications. How do you begin to identify what is your zone of genius to become that go-to person? Is it the things you're really good at? Is it the things you're passionate about? Is it you find a void in the organization and you go and fill that void? Like, how does someone start to identify opportunities around this zone of genius?
So you gave 3 examples there: what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and the white space. The
white space, good word. Yep.
Filling the void. It's the first 2 for sure. The first 2, and if it happens to be the third one, great. But the irony is, a lot of us tell our story from the past. When we communicate who we are, we talk about our experiences, accolades, the skills that we have, and that kind of storytelling arguably is the kind that makes people disinterested. It's all about you. So the zone of genius, ironically, is based in the past. It's like, okay, what are the things that you did in the past that really lit you up? You'd want to repeat that performance again and again. You look for opportunities that are like that, where you felt like you were unstoppable. So if you look back at those moments and really examine them, because something important came up during those times where you felt fulfilled, you felt energized. And, I could look back at some moments in my career where I felt like I was made for something. So if you can think about those times, it's really important to identify those, because that is inherent in how you can tell your story for people in the future, because you're helping them see what it is you love to do, and you'll have infinite energy to do that kind of work.
When we was going through that zone of genius, I got to admit, a good brand flashback to the beer commercials, the real men of genius.
Yeah, I love those.
Like, I'm wondering if you could do like a parody of that with like real zone of genius. Like, I forget. There's some famous '80s singer that did those from a band. I
I
can't
think it
remember who
would be
did
Eye
it.
of the Tiger guy.
I think, you know what? I think you're right.
I
I think
think
you're right. It was
the singer
them.
for Survivor. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Good memory there. Yeah, I think now let's say you identify that zone of genius inside your organization. You're that go-to person. You then start to think, oh, this is valuable outside my organization. But then you realize maybe it's not that genius after all. Maybe that zone that you build inside your organization doesn't exist outside. So how does an internal communicator start to find their zone as an external brand? I'm going to go back to my first point when I said about communicators I see. The people that are active on Twitter, the communicators that are active on LinkedIn, and the brands they are building without, I don't even think they recognize they're building a brand out there. So how do you find this zone of genius outside the organization if you're interested in it? And then how do you begin to carve that out for yourself professionally so that you're not just known as Greg, who, to your point, looking at the past, worked at XYZ company. Nope, you're Greg who does this outside the organization.
So the zone of genius is a recognition and an understanding of the kind of contribution that you make in others' lives that really you felt additive, and it's sort of an amplifier, and you created a win-win. So maybe the best thing I could do is just give you an example of a zone of genius moment from my past, because
Perfect.
It really has nothing to do with the experience itself or the skills that were acquired. It's just this thing that I was naturally good at. So I helped write a brand story for a gentleman who sold his organization for $600 million. So I have to say that I was pretty intimidated by this gentleman. And who am I? I've never sold a company for $600 million. That's pretty good. Who am I to tell this guy how to tell a story? But it's next to impossible to tell your own story. It's really hard to like go through that process and really understand it unless you're being coached in some way. So in the coaching, I helped him articulate his story. And I have these 100-word stories that I present, and there's weeks of work that we do. So I presented this 100-word story, and he got misty-eyed when I presented the story. And it wasn't because the writing was so amazing. It was because it captured who he was and crystallized it in a way that he hadn't seen. And it inspired him, but it also touched him. And then I realized, and I've had a few moments of this, but I realized for myself that I was operating in a way that was unique to me. That because I felt lit up by that, I touched this guy and he felt lit up by it. So I created the ultimate win-win. So maybe that's a better way of describing what a zone of genius is, like creating the ultimate win-win. So I believe that zone of genius moment is something that you are destined to repeat throughout your future. So I would argue that zone of genius should be the same. Mm-hmm. Whether you're internal or external, it's the same you and the same passions that are fueling that. So you only got to do the work once.
Yeah, I know that one of the things I struggle with is feeling like, okay, somebody else is already doing something out there, so I can't do it because then it'll look like I'm copying off of them or I'm not establishing my own voice when in fact, I don't listen to my own advice sometimes because I'm like, no, there's tons of room for lots of voices out there for communicators to create, because you don't know which audience, which crowd, which individual you're going to resonate with that maybe that person who was there first didn't resonate with for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned working with this $600 million man with his with his 600 word story. We're not talking about 600 words now. We're talking about a one line story. 600 words is not one line, Greg. Now, this is all leading up to you are doing a workshop for ICology members. So if you're an ICology member, you'll obviously get all the information. You can sign up. If you're not an ICology member, you can sign up. Go to members.joinicology.com, sign up, try it out for 2 weeks, do Greg's workshop. We want to have communicators in there. We're not going to go through the workshop today, obviously, because we want everybody to go through it live with you, Greg. But tease out a little bit about what people can expect about being a part of this workshop.
Yeah, on the other side of the workshop, I hope that you'll have a draft of your one-line story. So this is a deep crystallization of that zone of genius that we talked about. But also the B part to that is, well, how do you help people? What do they get as a result of that? Which is an interesting question to ask. So and it's 100-word story. The 100-word stories that I create for some, this is kind of a bet that I had with myself. Can I crystallize that 100-word story that made this gentleman misty-eyed? Can I get that down to one line? That was a huge challenge for me. How can we create that, and how can I create a template for people? So I'll reveal what that template is, and I'll help you understand how to tell this story in a way that's going to take the emphasis off of you and onto what you're trying to create for others, because that's kind of the other side of the coin here. When we tell our stories, we're always focused on, hi, I'm Greg Monaco, and I'm a branded story coach, and I worked at Ogilvy and Mather for 5 years. We talk about the past, and nobody cares about the past.
Yeah, so it goes back to a line a friend and I share a lot, was telling me what you did is not getting things done. So we focus too much on what happened versus what will happen as a result of it. And the first time I heard about what you're doing this work, Greg, was on one of your Clubhouse chats that you led, where I raised my hand and went through a bit of an experiment live on Clubhouse with you to go through this, to start to develop my one-line story. And then on one of our own Clubhouse chats, it came up that we need to do that for ICology. ICology needs its own one-line story. So it's possible that I see out there that some individuals might have several one-line stories that they're working from based on the audience, based on who they are talking to, who they are interacting with. Is that a fair thing to think of it in that way, or should everybody just have one?
That's a great point, because you mentioned that there could be different audiences. So when earlier on in the conversation, we said, you got to figure out what it is you're trying to manifest, who matters, who are you trying to make a connection with, and then start to create the relationships. It's the who matters, because really the story is for them. So if you have multiple audiences, I'd agree. You need to have probably stories that relate to the different audiences. But I would say that it would be a derivative of your core story. It would not be a whole new one-line story. It would be the second half of that one-line. And when we go through this, you'll see what I'm talking about here. But the second half of the story is something that is directly related to the target audience.
Well, I know that me going through it, and again, I didn't go through the full workshop. This was a live on Clubhouse exercise. It is a good model to get people really focused in on what you talked about, which is that zone of genius. Is when are you at your best? What is it that lights you up? What is it that turns you on? Whatever that is, even going through that exercise becomes very positive, because you're putting yourself in that mental framework of, where am I at my best? Where am I delivering the most value? Where am I getting the most satisfaction? Where am I getting the most reward out of it? To your point, sorry for you said 100-word story. I said 600-word story. I think I got hung up on the $600 million, Greg. But when you worked with that gentleman in that firm, like you said, both of you benefited from that. So how is it like when you're developing your one-line story, that's a benefit to the person you're telling it to, that they get it? Because I think that's something, internal communications is not alone in this, but sometimes communicators have struggled articulating exactly what they do other than here's my title and where I work. Yeah. So being able to put it in layman's terms that gives some insight into some of the amazing work communicators do, I think will be so valuable to the profession.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the best way to prove it out is just tell you what my one-line story is, and you can see, hopefully, you know, and the listeners here can just hear the difference in how I introduce myself as I can be. Hi, I'm Greg Monaco, and I'm a personal brand and story coach, and I help. And then, so I can go there, or I can just say, I help people tell magnetic stories so they can attract the work they love. One line. I help people tell magnetic stories so they can attract the work they love. What that does is it takes the emphasis off of me. I just become a catalyst for and to engineer what matters for other people. And now you can start to think, oh, okay, you're not going to tell your entire story in one line, but I want Chuck to lean into that and say, oh, how do you do that? Well, then you can start to expand on that story. And I think that's what all good branding is it starts to pique curiosity, so people lean in and start to ask questions. And that's what it's designed to do.
If I could do like the clapping emojis coming up on screen right now, Greg, I would, because I love the word magnetic and magnetism. I know that in a lot of marketing speak, you'll see like people use sticky, like, oh, let's make it stick. I've never liked that concept, because sometimes you don't want, as a receiver, as an audience member, sometimes you don't want things to stick. You don't want, but magnetism implies this draw, like this pulling in and that attraction part of it. So this is a great chance for communicators to really articulate that value and bring about some emotion. Like you said, the way I think about how I introduced myself to kick this off was the non-exciting way to introduce yourself. I now need to challenge myself with coming up with this one-line story to do a better job of kicking off what we are doing here with ICology. It's not about what I am, but about what we are doing.
And I think, you know, you guys have an amazing platform, and a rare platform where you're bringing, you know, internal communicators together to elevate their game. And there's a end result that people will get out of being part of the community, that if that's articulated specifically in an introduction, then people can start to project themselves as part of it, or see ways that they can bring others that they know in their networks into it. So, you know, it's meant to crack open a conversation, not just be fact-based.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I even like that, the cracking open a conversation. Sometimes you don't know what's inside. That's that's the best part about face-to-face interactive conversations. A lot of things we've missed over the last year plus, of not having just those random conversations out of nowhere. I know on the last live thing we did, I had Pinaki Kathiari on, and during the pandemic, he and I every 2 weeks met for 30 minutes with no agenda. And it's like each day we cracked open that call to a conversation that we didn't really know where it was going to go or what was going to happen. And I think that's some of the magic of inciting those conversations and getting people excited to have those conversations. And I think that all starts with individuals coming up with their one-line story as a way to draw that in to people, or to your point, attract people in.
Yeah. And it's really just as much as it's attracting other people in, is it's helping you recognize and also be responsible for the stuff that's coming out of your mouth, because it's going to evolve, but at the end of the workshop, I want to have a draft for you, for your one-line story. But as you test it, as you learn, it's going to evolve, and it's going to start to create new neural pathways about what you're trying to create for others. So it's going to put you in a position of service in a new way. And ultimately, that's the power of the one-line story. Yeah, it's certainly about telling a story to others and helping them understand what you're doing, but it's also becoming sort of like your buoy in the turbulent sea that you hold on to. And so you don't forget who you are. You're not getting washed away with other ideas.
Yeah, the other word that comes to mind here is creating a lot more intention with what you're doing. I think especially if you do the same thing over and over again, and maybe when you're talking about the neural pathways, we go into habit mode, robot mode, and we just repeat ourselves without really realizing what we're saying to get to the part that we think is most important, and not really being intent on that introduction part of what is this one-line story? How am I kicking off with it? So I encourage, again, everybody who's already an ICology member, you'll receive communication about it later this month. Sign up for Greg's workshop. If you're not an ICology member, please join. Members.joinicology.com. You get 2 weeks free. We'd love to have, we have obviously a lot of internal communicators in there, but always the people who are HR communications, social media communications, people who just want to learn more about the world of internal comms. We want to be as inclusive as possible of all people, regardless of where you work, what you do, who you are. So Greg, thank you so much for doing this live broadcast with us. Now we had some issues. I think LinkedIn's live streaming went down. So anybody that hung around and joined us on other platforms, thank you for doing that. Obviously, we have this recorded. We'll share it back on the LinkedIn page when it's over. But thank you, Greg, for all the work you've done helping ICology grow, doing this workshop, and also all the work you're doing outside of ICology, which I want to give you a chance to share about some of the communities that you have built out there to help others on this journey.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So I have a community called Fearless Brands, and Fearless Brands is here as a community to help us become better at what we're creating in the world, which is our own brands, our own voices, how we can create magnetism for the work we love to do. So, when we do the workshop, you'll learn a little bit more about that, but thank you for allowing me to tell the world about it, because I'm excited about it for sure.
Yeah, I know that my partner, Kristen, who people know is also part of ICology, she's a member of your Fearless Brands community, and after every meeting, she comes back with some aha moment, some big takeaway, some new connection. So yeah, we love the work you're doing there with Fearless Brands as well.
I love it. And the fact that you and Pinaki, get together for your, half-hour sort of improv sessions where that's every Tuesday at noon, I'll host a call, and the same kind of thing happens. It's like this kind of magic that bubbles up from the group. Yep. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody who hung around and listened. Thank you, Greg, for all the work you're doing, and see everybody here in a few weeks.